The Hickory and the Hydra, a treatise on the will to power. By John Zerga Jr. The absurdity of the $20 bill. You want to hear the dirtiest joke in American history? It's not in a George Carlin bit. It's not in some Eddie Izzard routine about flags and empire. It's in your wallet. Go ahead. If you still live in the pre-mark of the beast stage of economics and carry cash, pull out a 20. Staring back at you with that storm cloud of white hair and those eyes that look like they were carved out of a thunderstorm is Andrew Jackson. Old Hickory. The man who went to war with the central bank like it personally insulted his mother. The man who called the banking elite a den of vipers and thieves, and promised, by the eternal, I will rout you out. And what did the system do to honor this man who tried to kill the bank? They printed his face on the currency. That's not just irony, that's metaphysical comedy. That's up there with crucifying the savior and then turning the instrument of torture into jewelry. It's like putting a hardcore vegan on the KFC family bucket. It's like naming a casino after a guy who burned down casinos for a living. It's the kind of thing that, if you pitched it in a writer's room, they'd say, dial it back, that's too on the nose. From a Platonic perspective, that bill is pure symbol. A little rectangle of fiat paper functioning as a miniature cave wall. Shadows of value, shadows of sovereignty, shadows of history flickering in green ink. On that surface, the image of the man who tried to smash the very system that now immortalizes him. The form of irony in 6.14 inches by 2.61 inches. From a Neoplatonic angle, it's like the lower emanations trolling their own higher cause, the monetary system, an emanation of human power and fear, embedding within itself the face of the one man who briefly interrupted its ascent toward total domination. The Hydra tattooing a portrait of the lumberjack on one of its heads. That's why I like starting with the 20. Because in that absurd little object, the whole contradiction of America is right there. Rebellion printed on obedience, resistance embossed on compliance, a warrior saint glued to a debt coupon. And that's the entry point to the real question. Who was Andrew Jackson, really? A hero, a villain, a monster, a prophet with a hickory stick? And why, in a world of safety signage and HR-approved courage, does his ghost still haunt our money? To answer that, I have to do what I always do, grab the torch of reason, walk into the cave, and start poking the shadows. 2. The Orphan and the Stoic Forge. Philosophy, real philosophy, not the kind that lives only in tenured offices and polite conferences, starts with wounds. Plato had his teacher murdered by the state. The Stoics were born in a burned-out marketplace. Kant stared at a universe he could never fully know. The streets say the same thing in rougher language, you don't get steel without fire. Jackson's life reads like a grim Old Testament prequel. By the age of 14, he's effectively alone. His father is dead before he takes his first breath. His brothers and mother are swallowed up by the meat grinder of the Revolutionary War, disease, captivity, British steel. He's not just an orphan, he's a kid baptized in collective trauma. Then you get that famous moment. Jackson, a boy, refuses to clean a British officer's boots. The officer slashes his face and hand with a sword. That line of steel across his skin is not just a scar, it's a thesis statement. From a Stoic lens, this is the birth of prohairesis, the inner faculty of choice. Epictetus says, "You can chain my body, but you cannot chain my will." Jackson seems to have taken that personally. The world says, kneel. He takes the blade instead, pain over submission, scar over servitude. If Bruce Wayne lost his parents and retreated into a cave with bats and billions, Jackson lost his family and went into a frontier bar fight with the Republic itself. He's Batman, if Batman had no Alfred, no Wayne Enterprises, and instead just a horse, a grudge, and a terrifying level of follow-through. But Stoicism alone doesn't explain him. Stoicism teaches acceptance of fate, inner equanimity, reason over rage. Jackson was something else, more like a hybrid of Stoic endurance and Norse berserker theology. Odin doesn't recruit accountants, he recruits the ones who keep fighting after they've already been stabbed. In Norse myth, the highest honor isn't safety, it's a good death. Valhalla isn't a retirement community, it's a combat after-party. Bushido echoes the same idea. The samurai must live as one already dead, free precisely because he has surrendered his fear of death. Jackson doesn't say any of this philosophically. He embodies it. He carries bullets in his body like other men carry grudges. He duels. He bleeds. He doesn't just survive hardship, he metabolizes it into will. Here's where the psychology kicks in. When you're orphaned early, the universe gets unmasked. The polite, Well-lit corporate foyer of reality flickers, and you see the concrete loading dock behind it, arbitrary loss, sudden violence, bureaucratic cruelty. Some people collapse under that. Some escape into fantasy, addiction, or corporate PowerPoints. Jackson went the other way. He made a vow, explicit or not, to never be the one waiting for someone else's decision. In Kant's terms, he refused to exist as mere means. He would be an end, and he would bend circumstances, sometimes brutally, to that end. So he becomes lawyer, judge, general, president. But always with the same signature: I will not be at the mercy of the machine. If there's a Hydra, I will swing until my arms give out. That's the forge of Old Hickory, orphaned, slashed, scarred, and convinced that, in a world run by wolves, the only unforgivable sin is being a sheep. 3. The Battle of New Orleans, the triumph of the absurd. If the Battle of New Orleans didn't actually happen, Hollywood would have invented it as a rejected script. Picture it like a film trailer. In a world where empires march in red, one sick, half-starved general leads a motley cast of misfits to stand in the mud between a newborn republic and extinction. The British Empire, fresh from burning Washington, D.C., shows up like the Galactic Empire rolling into some muddy outer rim planet. They're professional, drilled, disciplined. They move in ranks the way a corporate spreadsheet moves in columns. They are the Borg in red coats. On the other side, you've got Jackson's army, Tennessee and Kentucky militia who shoot better than they stand in formation, Choctaw warriors who understand the land like a second circulatory system, free men of color, Jean Lafitte's pirates, and every other human outlier that the polite world doesn't know how to file. If Seven Samurai and the Dirty Dozen had a fever dream after binge-watching Star Wars and the Magnificent Seven, this would be the cast. Strategically, the British should win. On paper, they are the Kantian ideal of rational military organization. In practice, they are walking into a Neoplatonic ambush. The higher, more perfect form of warfare, columns, uniforms, regulations, comes crashing down into the messy, contingent realm of swamps, fog, and American stubbornness. Jackson can barely stand. Dysentery is chewing through him. But Will doesn't care. He understands something very simple that Plato, Sun Tzu, and every dock worker on Earth all know in their bones: if you control the ground and you control the morale, you control the outcome. So he throws up earthworks, cotton bales, mud, improvised fortifications that would give a Prussian officer a stroke. He's not thinking in parade ground elegance, he's thinking in meat grinder geometry. How many of them can I funnel into how small a kill zone for how long? The British march. Jackson's weird, patched together army fires. The casualty ratio becomes obscene. From a logical standpoint, this is the victory of reality over ritual. The British follow the rules of war. Jackson follows the rules of physics and fear. One side is playing chess, the other side is flipping the board and using a rook as a projectile. From a stoic standpoint, Jackson has already accepted death. His own life is expendable. The Republic's isn't. That clarity lets him do something psychologically insane but tactically effective: stand firm in a situation where, by all respectable calculations, he should lose. In that moment, the common man concept isn't a campaign slogan, it's musket smoke. It's the idea that a bunch of so-called nobodies, farmers, hunters, pirates, when welded together by a single will, can beat an empire with better accents. The Battle of New Orleans is America's. We're not supposed to win this level. It's the Rogue One mission, suicidal on paper, indispensable in impact. It secures the Mississippi, stabilizes the frontier, and stamps a message into the national psyche. We don't have to play by their rules to beat them. And that, right there, is Jackson's first major philosophical contribution. He turns praxis into proof. Power is not exclusively reserved for the polished. Under the right conditions, the rough can rewrite history. IV. The Bank War, slaying the hidden Hydra. Now we leave mud and musket smoke and step into a quieter battlefield, one far more dangerous because the casualties don't bleed in public. They foreclose in private. This is the part polite history textbooks treat like the boring policy episode in an otherwise action-packed season. That's a tell. When the story slows down on the surface, the Hydra usually went underground. In Jackson's time, that Hydra had an office, the Second Bank of the United States. Let's translate the jargon into street terms. The bank is a semi-private, semi-public money factory. It holds the federal government's deposits. It has the power to expand or contract credit. Its shareholders, many foreign, many elite, can profit when the economy inflates and survive when it deflates. In Platonic language, it's the move from timocracy, rule of the warriors, toward oligarchy, rule of the wealthy. In Neoplatonic terms, it's a lower, greedy emanation trying to masquerade as a higher rational necessity. In modern gaming terms, it's the pay-to-win mechanic patched into your supposedly fair system. Nicholas Biddle runs this thing like Saruman in a banking tower. He's educated, refined, confident in his right to rule through credit. He doesn't need to be elected, he has leverage over those who are. If you've read Jim Marrs on the Money Power, or G. Edward Griffin on the Creature from Jekyll Island, or Joseph P. Farrell on Hidden Financial Cartels, you'll recognize the archetype, a supranational economic priesthood that issues sacraments in currency instead of grace. Jackson doesn't write a white paper. He smells something foul. The borrower is servant to the lender, scripture says. Nietzsche, crashing the party from the future, would call this the master-slave dynamic in financial form. Manly P. Hall would talk about economic bonds as esoteric chains. Jordan Maxwell would show you how the language of commerce baptizes everything in maritime metaphors, banks, liquid assets, currency. So Jackson does what he does best. He says no. The bank wants its charter renewed. Biddle is confident. Congress is for sale. Most men in high office are functionally NPCs, non-player characters, reading scripts someone else wrote. Jackson vetoes the charter. His veto message is not a technical quibble. It reads like the Book of Amos crossbred with a Mark Dice Media rant. He calls out the concentration of power, the foreign ownership of stock, the use of government privilege to enrich a few at the expense of the many. He basically says, government has no business minting aristocrats. From a Kantian perspective, Jackson is defending the principle that citizens must be treated as ends in themselves, not as collateral for private speculation. From a biblical perspective, he's staging a miniature jubilee, trying to break cycles of structural bondage. From a Zerga on the streets perspective, he's saying, you don't partner with the loan shark to run the orphanage. The Hydra, of course, doesn't just accept decapitation. Biddle responds by contracting credit. He deliberately tightens the money supply, triggering financial pain, hoping the public will blame Jackson and crawl back begging for the stability of the bank. This is what today we'd call weaponized liquidity. It's the ancient pattern William Bramley would associate with shepherds keeping their human flock in manageable panic: squeeze, release, squeeze. Most politicians would fold. Their power comes from popularity. Popularity crumbles when the Hydra squeezes people's wallets. Jackson doubles down. He pulls federal deposits out of the bank and spreads them to pet banks, smaller state institutions. He tells Martin Van Buren, the bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it. And here's the insane part. He pays off the national debt. The only president in American history to do it. For a brief shimmering second, the republic stands without the collar of interest around its neck. Is it perfect? No. Are there unintended consequences? Yes. Do later financial panics happen? Absolutely. But in the long, slow arc from the early Rothschild-controlled European bond machine to the Federal Reserve to globalist institutions with three-letter acronyms, Jackson is an anomaly, a glitch in the long-term project of turning nations into securitized, debt-backed cattle. If you read David Icke, you'll see the language of archons and reptilian overlords. If you read Farrell, you'll read about breakaway civilizations and Nazi international networks. If you read Daniel Estelin, you'll see Bilderberg spreadsheets wrapped around parliamentary throats. Whether you buy all, some, or none of it, the pattern is obvious. Those who control the issuance of money control the narrative of reality. Jackson, half dead, half mad with faith and fury, swings his hickory and, for one generation, breaks the rhythm of that narrative. In a corporatist world obsessed with living forever through compound interest and perpetual growth, he does the most punk rock thing imaginable: he pulls the plug and walks away. The Trail of Tears, the tragedy of utilitarianism. Now we walk into the part every honest thinker dreads, the abyss where admiration and horror share the same address. If I wanted to write propaganda, I'd stop right now. Freeze frame old Hickory in a heroic pose, cue the swelling soundtrack, roll the credits. But I said I wanted truth, not fan fiction. And truth, like God, doesn't care if I'm comfortable. Here's the hard fact. The same man who stood against the bank also oversaw and unleashed one of the most brutal episodes in American history: Indian removal in the Trail of Tears. If we're serious, philosophically, theologically, morally, we cannot file that under, oops, and move. On. It's not a typo. It's central to the paradox. From Jackson's point of view, this was a utilitarian solution to what he saw as an inevitable collision. White settlers were flooding into the Southeast. Native nations, Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, were trying to hold ground, negotiate, adapt. The Supreme Court even recognized their sovereignty in Worcester v. Georgia. Jackson famously, and maybe apocryphally, replies, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." Here, Jackson stands not as lone hero against machine, but as the spearpoint of the machine. He tells himself, and the world, that removal is mercy. If they stay, they will be wiped out by uncontrolled settler violence. If we move them west, they have a chance. This is the Thanos argument: commit a contained horror now to prevent a larger, chaotic horror later. In his mental math, the ledger balances. From a narrow, brutal consequentialism, he can sleep at night. From Kant's perspective, this is unforgivable. Kant would argue, you cannot use entire peoples purely as means to the stability of your preferred majority. The moral law within does not permit sacrificing some for the comfort of others as if they were furniture. But history is not a philosophy seminar. It is more like Gladiator, full of sand, blood, and men insisting they are necessary, while the arena floor says otherwise. Jackson's removal policy produces the trail of tears, forced marches, broken treaties, starvation, freezing temperatures, mass graves. The image of barefoot children in snow, elders collapsing by the roadside, people dying with their entire world reduced to what they can carry on their backs, that image is the counterweight to every heroic portrait. Platonically, if Jackson at his best is a guardian defending the city from financial oligarchs, Jackson at his worst is a corrupted guardian who has turned the sword of the state inward on innocent populations. Neoplatonically, the same will that can ascend toward the good can also, when wrongly directed, become a dark, fallen reflection, still powerful, but now bent. There's another layer: Christian theology. The same scriptures Jackson might have quoted about borrowers and lenders also speak of treating the stranger well, of not moving ancient boundary stones, of judgment on those who trample the poor. Jesus does not say, "Blessed are the empire builders." Yet, empire building is what Jackson does. The republic expands. The land is seized. Cotton profits explode. Decades later, the same territory becomes central to the Civil War and the industrial might that eventually dominates the continent. Did his policies help preserve the Union later? Very likely. Does that justify the method? That's the ugly moral calculus of power. That's the moment where the philosopher in me wants a neat answer, and the Christian in me hears a sobbing child on the trail and refuses to sign off. So I don't resolve it. I let it burn, as it must. Greatness, in the raw historical sense, does not equal goodness. Genghis Khan is great. So is Jackson. But the word great there is not a compliment, it's a measurement of impact, not righteousness. In the mythic register, Jackson becomes a tragic figure, half Maximus, half Thanos, half King Saul, chosen, powerful, decisive, and yet fatally limited by his own worldview. The man who fought one hydra ended up feeding another, the hydra of manifest destiny, the hydra of empire that eats nations and calls it progress. The legacy, the democratization of the executive. Before Jackson, the presidency is basically a gentleman's club. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams again, Virginia planters and Massachusetts intellectuals passing the baton in a refined relay. The people vote, but in a distant, almost ceremonial way. The real action is between statesmen in powdered wigs and polished drawing rooms. Jackson kicks the saloon doors off that arrangement. He is the first president whose origin story feels like a bar fight instead of a salon debate. He is not from the founders' inner ring. He is frontier. He is rough. He swears. He duels. If George Washington is the marble statue in a temple, Jackson is the guy leaning against the back wall with a scar and a stare. He invites the public to the White House for his inauguration. They arrive like a Walmart Black Friday. The place gets trashed. Mud on the carpets, shattered china, whiskey-soaked chaos. The elites panic. The republic is doomed. The mob has come. Jackson reportedly escapes through a window. I laugh every time I picture that. The metaphor writes itself. For the first time, the American people don't just vote at the door, they trample the living room. The room layout itself, the sacred, West Wing as distance, gets violated. But beneath the slapstick chaos is a real philosophical shift. Jackson turns the president into tribune of the people. He sees the office not as servant of Congress but as an elected battering ram for the majority against entrenched interests, financial, sectional, or judicial. The nullification crisis is the clearest example. South Carolina, led by John C. Calhoun, threatens to nullify federal tariffs and potentially secede. Jackson, no lover of tariffs himself, still reacts like a man whose dog is being sized up for dismemberment. He threatens force. He basically says, I will hang the first man of them I can get my hands on from the first tree I can find. This is not subtle constitutional interpretation. This is gladiator energy. I am the commander of the armies of the North, and I will have my vengeance. Except here, the vengeance is for the Union. In doing this, Jackson locks in a certain trajectory. The presidency is the centralizing pole of the Republic. Later presidents, from Lincoln to FDR to modern executives, inherit that expanded sense of power, sometimes to protect liberty, sometimes to corral it. From a Kantian point of view, this centralization is dangerous. If the wrong will holds that scepter, the whole moral order can bend. From a Stoic point of view, it's another reminder, never give to external offices what belongs to your inner faculty of judgment. From a cinematic perspective, Jackson is the original, anti-hero president, archetype, part Atticus Finch, part Tony Soprano. He's not the sanitized politician of campaign ads, he's the flawed heavy hitter the Republic calls when the knives come out. And that's part of why we still argue about him. He broke the aristocratic model and replaced it with something populist, volatile, and personal. That genie never went back into the bottle. 7. Synthesis. The necessary monster and the will to power. So here's the synthesis, as clean as I can make it while admitting that, morally, it's anything but clean. Andrew Jackson is a will to power in human form. Not Nietzsche's full philosophical system. Jackson isn't sitting in the hermitage writing aphorisms about eternal recurrence, but he is a living testament to one of Nietzsche's core observations. Life, at its most vital, pushes, asserts, shapes, and overcomes. It does not simply endure, it strives to reorder. Jackson's entire arc is that striving. Orphanhood trying to crush him, he refuses to kneel. Empires trying to dictate terms, he reroutes the battlefield. Financial elites trying to chain the state, he breaks the charter. Internal fragmentation threatening the Union, he stares it down with a noose in hand. From a Platonic angle, he's the timocratic man, driven by honor and victory, struggling against the slide into oligarchy. From a Neoplatonic angle, he is a powerful soul oscillating between ascent toward justice and descent into domination. From a Christian angle, he is a walking paradox, a man whose actions sometimes align with scriptural justice and other times trample it. He is not a tidy moral exemplar. He is a necessary monster for a particular historical moment. Norse myth, Bushido, Spartan Agoj, they all affirm a hard truth modern corporatism tries to bury under ergonomic chairs and 401k emails. Sometimes, survival requires violent men doing violent things. The danger is when we start calling all violence necessary, or refuse to question the stories we tell about necessity. Jackson is the bouncer at history's biker bar, exactly the guy you want when foreign empires and domestic hydras are kicking in the door. But do you want that same guy managing the daycare, writing the ethics policy, designing the future of a diverse continent? That's where the horror creeps in. Our age, by contrast, is obsessed with safety, comfort, and the denial of death. We want immortality through technology, health metrics, supplements, and cloud backups. We shiver at the idea that death might be an essential ingredient in life's recipe. Jackson's life screams the opposite. Every major act of his, good or evil, assumes that death is normal, risk is normal, stakes are real. You don't charge British cannons if you think longevity is the ultimate good. You don't go to war with the central bank if you're planning for a stable retirement. You don't sign removal policies if you think you'll answer in this life to every individual tear shed. Our corporatist, consumerist world is penny wise and pound foolish precisely because it flips that script. We obsess over micro risks, food labels, handrails, disclaimers, while ignoring macro dangers, soul erosion, structural injustice, financial predation, spiritual vacancy. We want to live forever in a padded room and call it wellness. The philosophers and prophets, from Plato's cave to Christ's cross to the Book of Enoch's watchers to the Quranic warnings about arrogance, keep saying the same thing. If you try to turn the world into a perfectly controlled machine, you end up losing your humanity. The hydra of centralized power feeds on our fear of death, selling us false security in exchange for real freedom. Jackson, for all his sins, didn't fear death in the way our institutions do. He was wrong about many things, but he did not kneel to the machine. He punched it, sometimes at the right target, sometimes at the wrong. 8. The 20 is icon, the ghost in the machine. And so we circle back to that humble, ridiculous, spiritually radioactive object, the $20 bill. On that piece of cotton linen, the modern fiat system, an abstract construct of central banks, digital ledgers, derivatives, and global trade, carries the face of the man who tried to strangle its ancestor in its crib. If you've read Zecharia Sitchin or Erich von Daniken, you know their riff: ancient beings, advanced civilizations, hidden architects of systems. You don't have to buy the literal aliens to appreciate the metaphor. Structures outlive their creators, and symbols take on lives of their own. Jackson's portrait on the 20 is a symbolic glitch. It is as if the system is forced to wear, as a mask, the mug of the one human being who showed it could be beaten for a moment. Mark Dice could do a whole video just interviewing people about it. Do you know the guy on this bill fought the idea of centralized banking? Most wouldn't. That's part of the joke. To the initiated, those who read history not as a sanitized corporate brochure but as a bloody saga of powers colliding, the 20 becomes something else, a memento mori for empires and men alike. For Jackson, it's a reminder, even the fiercest will can't stop time. For the bank, it's a reminder, even if you win in the long run, there was a moment you almost died. For us, it's a challenge: will we live as debtors sleepwalking through our own dispossession, or as free souls willing to ask ugly questions about who benefits? Every time that bill passes from hand to hand, America unknowingly reenacts a parable: greatness and guilt, courage and cruelty, rebellion and consolidation, all pressed into green ink. And maybe that's fitting. Maybe a nation as contradictory as ours deserves a patron saint as contradictory as Jackson, a man who both defended the republic from a hydra of credit and drove innocent peoples into the wilderness, a man who made the presidency a tribune's club and a potential tyrant's scepter, a man whose life forces us to confront our own hunger for safety, power, and forgetfulness. Why this matters now and why I can't let it go. I don't write this as an academic doing character analysis from the safety of a university office. I write it as a scholar of the streets, watching modern versions of the bank, modern versions of removal, modern versions of nullification, play out in corporate cubicles, digital platforms, logistics hubs, and faceless boardrooms. When I watch a manager shut down honest criticism because it might cause trouble, I see the same fearfulness that Jackson despised in Congress. When I see central banks conjure liquidity out of nowhere while ordinary people drown in interest, I see Biddle's ghost smirking. When I see whole communities pushed out of neighborhoods by gentrification, economic policy, or regulatory capture, I see softer echoes of the Trail of Tears: no soldiers, just spreadsheets. And when I hear people say, "Don't rock the boat, don't talk about that, don't question the system, just be grateful and quiet," I hear the exact opposite of what Jackson's life, at its best moments, represents. The temptation is to want heroes without blood on their hands, clarity without complexity, greatness without tragedy. But that's not how history works, and it's not how human beings work. The Bible, the sagas, the myths, they all know this. Moses kills a man, David steals a wife, Peter denies Christ, yet their stories are still told, not to excuse their sins, but to reveal the scale of the drama we're in. Jackson's story forces me to grow up, philosophically. I don't get to pick a team jersey, pro-Jackson, or anti-Jackson, and call it a day. I have to sit with the contradiction. I have to admit that the same will that can fight hydras can also trample the innocent. I have to own the fact that, if I had Jackson's power with my own mixture of virtues and flaws, I might not do better. That's humbling. At the same time, his defiance of financial oligarchy, his refusal to kneel to international banking cartels, his willingness to risk political suicide to do what he believed was right, those things shame our current crop of hollow men, tailored suits with no inner core. So I walk away with this. I don't want to be Jackson. I don't want to be Biddle. I don't want to be the British marching in neat lines into a slaughter. And I definitely don't want to be the quiet clerk in the bank's basement, telling myself I'm just doing my job, while the machine eats people. I want to be the man who sees the hydra, names it, and refuses, within my scale, in my time, to let it define reality unchallenged. I want to be the guy who can carry scars without turning them into licenses for cruelty. I want to be the philosopher who walks through the valley of the shadow of death with my eyes open. Neither worshipping death nor pretending I can escape it. In that sense, Andrew Jackson, ghost on our money, contradiction in our history, is not my idol. He's my case study, a living, breathing warning and inspiration wrapped into one bruised, bullet-riddled body. He shows how far the will to power can go when it's harnessed to a single human frame. He also shows why that will must be chained to something higher than national interest or personal honor, chained to the good, the true, the just, as best as our finite, damaged minds can grasp it. If we don't anchor power to something above our own advantage, we will repeat his worst crimes with better PR. And if we don't cultivate any power at all, if we surrender entirely to comfort, corporatism, and the false immortality of consumerism, then we will never repeat his best acts either. We will simply be managed. So I look at the 20. I look at Jackson. I look at the bank. I look at the trail. And I say, to myself as much as to history, I will not be a slave to lenders, nor a tool of empire. I will not romanticize monsters, nor pretend I don't need guardians. I will not worship safety, nor glorify reckless cruelty. But I will, God helping me, stand where I'm called to stand, swing where I'm called to swing, and keep my conscience louder than the crowd and clearer than the script. That's the only way to live honestly in a world haunted by hydras and hickory ghosts. And that, in the end, is why the 20 still matters, and why the man on it refuses to stay buried. Zerga, in synthesis with the philosophers,